staff having technical expertise in the field of fish and wildlife habitat restoration. We're really glad to have them with us on this project. During this meeting, you'll be hearing from Bob Burns, our Detroit River keeper and technical advisor for this project, who will provide you with some general background. For engineering and design, we've engaged Environmental Consulting and Technology, or ECT for short, who has a wealth of experience with these kinds of projects in the Great Lakes region and the Detroit River. You'll be hearing from ECT's Alice Bailey following Bob's introduction. So before we bring in Bob, let's hear from Alice, who will provide you with a little housekeeping for the meeting and how you can participate with any questions or comments. Alice?
Thanks, Sam. Hello, all. I have just a few housekeeping items to cover. We have a great group of participants today, so if you could all please mute your phones or devices so we don't pick up any background noises, we'd appreciate that. There will be a question and answer time at the end of the presentation where we will open up the discussion. If you are joining us via the computer and are able, please use the chat function to ask your questions. We will answer those questions first. If your question is lengthy and you'd rather have the opportunity to speak, but are still on via the computer, you can type "I have a question" in the chat, and then I can call on you for your question. Once we're finished with the chat box questions, we will then open it up for verbal questions. So if you're not on with us on the computer and are just on the phone, you can at that time unmute yourself and ask your question. Once you're done asking your question, we do ask that you remute yourself. If you are joining us only by phone, you hopefully have the PDF of the presentation in front of you. Periodically throughout the presentation, we will indicate the slide or page number that we're on, so you can hopefully keep pace with the discussion. So with that, I will pass the presentation on to the Detroit River Keeper, Bob Burns.
Thank you, Alice. To understand why we are holding this meeting today and proposing this habitat restoration project, a little historical context regarding the development of the Detroit River might be helpful. The first inhabitants of the Detroit River were indigenous Native Americans who moved to this area not long after the last ice age's glaciers receded up into Canada. The river at that time was a relatively shallow waterway with large coastal wetlands along its shores and large forests and open wet meadows inland. As late as the early 1800s, the river was still mostly lined with large expanses of native coastal wetlands along both sides of the American and Canadian sides of the river. But by the mid-1900s, much of this wetland was lost to urbanization, developing industry, and hardened shorelines to accommodate docks and seawalls. As of today, on the U.S. side, we have lost nearly 97% of this important coastal wetland. As ships became larger to carry more cargo, they needed deeper water for their drafts. Because of this, it became necessary to dredge out large stretches of the Detroit River to create deep channels. In this process, a lot of the river's natural rocky bottom was removed, destroying much of the river's natural fish habitat and spawning grounds. On page 6, you can see from the early 1900s and well into the 1960s, Detroit River saw a major increase in human population and industrial development along its shoreline, especially during the World War II production years. Without any regulatory oversight, huge amounts of industrial discharge flowed into the river, further impacting the remaining natural habitats and fish and wildlife populations. Large combined sewer overflows, CSOs, containing millions of gallons of untreated sewage discharged into the river from area municipal waste treatment plants when they reached overcapacity after heavy rain events. These events further stressed an already impacted ecosystem. By the 1970s, people had enough and fought to get both state and federal officials to enact laws and regulations to enforce and regulate all of these harmful discharges and pollutants. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed by Congress to provide this enforcement. But unfortunately, in the Detroit River, the damage was already done. To target especially impacted areas of the Great Lakes, an amendment in 1987 to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement between the U.S. and Canada allowed for the creation of the Areas of Concerns, or AOCs. These AOCs would be administered by Individual Public Advisory Council, or PACs, and are made up of local stewards with assistance from state and federal agency representatives. On page 9, you can see that between the province of Ontario and the 7 states that surround the Great Lakes, 43 AOCs were designated, the Detroit River and Rouge River being 2 of them. Each of these AOCs could be designated with as many as 15 beneficial use impairment, or BUIs. It was determined by the Detroit River's PAC that 11 BUIs existed for the Detroit River. The 2 BUIs listed in red have already been addressed and then removed from our AOC's action management list. The 2 BUIs in red on this slide, degradation of fish and wildlife populations and the loss of fish and wildlife habitat, are the reason why we are proposing this project today. A guidance document developed in 2014 identified locations for each targeted habitat restoration project, requiring completion to remove these 2 BUIs from our AOC. This document helped open doors to Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. Here on page 13, you can see where each targeted project is located. Note that all projects are either completed or are under development. The project plans that we will present this evening are for the North and South Hennepin Marsh Restoration Project. They are located in the Trenton Channel between the upper end of Grosse Ile and Riverview. The Trenton Channel is one of those parts of the Detroit River that was highly impacted by industrial and municipal waste discharges, hardening of shorelines, and the loss of natural coastal wetland habitat. Located just above the upper river bridge to Grosse Ile is the area called the North Hennepin Marsh Site. It contains a small amount of remnant coastal wetland and a large area of submergent vegetation, although the bottom lacks any natural rocky structure. Surveys of this area have shown that the installation of some habitat features could greatly improve this area's ability to hold and provide breeding areas for native fish and wildlife populations. Located just below the upper river bridge to Grosse Ile is a site called the South Hennepin Marsh area. This area contains a more complete, protected, and productive wetland area. Unfortunately, due to high water levels that we periodically see and are currently experiencing today, the protective outer shoals that surround the wetland are quickly eroding away, and once gone, open this area up to wave action and erosive forces from the main channel that will further degrade this wetland. For our next presentation, we'll hear from Alice Bailey, who is one of our project consultants from ECT. They are assisting us with their design and engineering work and will go to further details regarding the habitat restoration work that is proposed for both of the Hennepin Marsh sites.
Thank you, Bob, for that history of the Detroit River AOC and the background on the current project. I'm now going to dive a little deeper into the work being proposed in Hennepin Marsh. You've heard from Bob and Sam with Friends of Detroit River. As they mentioned, they are really the ones who are spearheading this project and who have received funding from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, or NOAA. I am representing the engineering firm, Environmental Consulting and Technology, or ECT. We have had the privilege of working with Friends of Detroit River for a number of years and recently worked with them on the habitat restoration projects at Stony and Celeron Islands. So we have that background to build on, and so we are really excited to continue restoring the habitat in this area of the Detroit River with this Hennepin project. We also recognize the very important role of property owners and all of you, neighbors and stakeholders. The reason we're here today is to share with you this project, and also this project wouldn't be possible without the support and permits obtained from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. As discussed earlier, the Detroit River was designated as an area of concern, or AOC. With that designation comes a list of BUIs, or beneficial use impairments, which are basically reasons why the water body is an area of concern. 2 of the Detroit River's BUIs, or reasons for impairments, are degradation of fish and wildlife populations and loss of fish and wildlife habitat. You heard from Bob earlier about the history as to how these impairments came to be. So a main focus of this project is to address those 2 BUIs, and really the reason the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding has been provided for this work. We do also understand the importance of the waterway for recreational purposes, so the project will not only provide the habitat restoration, but will maintain the recreational benefits as well. I know Bob shared with you already some maps and views of the project location. I just wanted to remind you here on slide 19 of the context of where the project work is concentrated. This is a map centered on Grosse Ile. The dark blue rectangle is the area we are discussing. Here's just another view of Grosse Ile and an arrow pointing to the project area. I thought this aerial provides a little more context with the airport and bridges visible. As Bob mentioned, we've been viewing this project as having two parts. We consider the north of the bridge as North Hennepin Marsh and the area south of the bridge as South Hennepin Marsh. On the right, you can see a zoomed-in bird's-eye view of the marsh with some photos taken shown on the left from the water of both areas. These photos represent more or less how these sites look today. Now that you understand the context of the project, I'll get into what it is that we're actually proposing. First, I want to briefly describe how we got here. Though conceptualized much earlier, we started working on developing this project in the fall of 2018. Since then, we've collected a lot of data in the area, including survey, topographical information, geotechnical information, river flow information, and also information on the fish and wildlife usage of the area, including fish surveys and bird surveys. All of this information is used to help us determine the best ways to achieve the project goals of habitat restoration, enhancement of the fishery, while maintaining recreational usage. So here on slide 22, you'll see a summary of the features and improvements being proposed. You'll hear me explaining more about the habitat shoals, revegetation goals, and habitat features being included in the project. Using that collected information, we began to develop our design and start to get it down on paper in the form of project drawings. Here on slide 23, I've included our project plan sheet for the overall proposed conditions. This is basically a bird's eye view or plan view of both the north and south areas. The box on the left shows the south project area and the box on the right shows the north area. You can see lines of color. The orange lines depict the series of habitat shoals being proposed. Here on slide 24, I'll concentrate on North Hennepin Marsh for a few minutes. You see the aerial on the left with the corresponding piece of our plan drawing on the right. Again, the orange lines you see on our plan are the proposed shoals. You saw in Bob's portion of the presentation the loss of the wetland habitat. The basic idea of the installation of these shoals is to restore some of that lost wetland habitat. Through the use of these shoals, we achieve protection of the area behind them, which leads to the development of the restored habitat. These shoals themselves, together with the fish and spawning areas, which are the blue boxes shown on the plan, and additional in-water rock piles, provide a plethora of fish and aquatic habitat opportunities. As part of this project, we're proposing three basic types of shoals. They all have a rock component, but each are configured differently and have some different features. A portion of the project will have shoals that have a vegetation and habitat log component. A portion of the project will have rock-only shoals, and a portion of the project will have a special length of shoal dedicated to the common tern, a threatened bird species. Here on slide 25, I have our cross-section view of each type of shoal shown, but what might be more interesting to you are the photos on the right. As mentioned earlier, we have completed projects near Grosse Ile at Stony and Celeron Island, where we have constructed similar shoals. So we've got a lot of photos to pull from to show you what these will look like, since the proposed shoals here at Hennepin will be similar to those at Stony and Celeron. So you'll notice in the top photo the vegetation. This was taken shortly after planting, so the vegetation in this photo is still young and getting established. With our other installed projects, we have seen this vegetation attract birds and butterflies. It may be difficult to see in the photo, but this shoal also incorporates log habitat along the shoreline of the shoal on the right side of the photo. These logs installed at various locations along the shoal provide habitat for fish and turtles. In the middle photo, you will see the rock-only shoal. Though we're not proposing vegetation on the shoal initially, it is expected that over a period of years, vegetation will most likely establish in and between the rocks. So though no additional habitat features are included on this type of shoal, The rock itself has proven to be very attractive to a wide variety of fish. We've seen firsthand and heard from the local fishing community that fish enjoy the rock around the shoals. And the photo on the bottom is of the common tern habitat shoals. This shoal provides a small stone gravel on top, which the common terns use for nesting. Aside from the common terns, we've observed other avian species utilizing the shoals we have already installed. This is an artist's rendering of the potential view of a portion of the shoals at North Hennepin Marsh. The view is taken from the river side of the project, looking slightly southeast towards Grosse Ile. Though rendered in, the birds flying, the vegetation, the heron, the fish in the water, the boaters and anglers are all common sights at the projects we've already installed and would be expected here once the project is completed. Here is another artist's rendering of the potential view of a portion of the shoals, taken from the river side of the project looking southeast. This rendering shows the rock-only shoals, or the shoals without vegetation. This is another artist's rendering of the project. This one is a view looking from the Grosse Ile shoreline and out towards the west, towards the shoals. Now moving south to South Hennepin Marsh, you will hear a lot of similarities between the two projects. In the south, however, there are existing or portions of existing islands that we will be incorporating into our project. Again, the aerial is on the left and our plan drawing is on the right. The idea is really to build upon the remaining pieces of the existing islands, restoring them and expanding them to offer the protection of the area behind for habitat restoration and reestablishment. For this South Marsh area, we are proposing that most of the shoals will have the vegetation component. The only difference between the two sections shown here is that some of the shoal will be constructed on top of those existing island areas, and some will be built up from the riverbed. Again, the photos shown here have young vegetation. After establishment, the vegetation will become more mature. These shoals offer all of the same benefits as the North Shoals, including habitat for birds, butterflies, fish, turtles, and other aquatic species. Here on slide 31, we have an artist's rendering of the South Hennepin Marsh area proposed conditions. This view is taken from the riverside looking northeast. One of our proposed shoals is in the distance near the left side of the photo, and the second shoal is here in the foreground towards the right-hand side of the photo. Here's another artist's rendering of the South Project area, an interesting view from the sky looking towards the southwest. Slide 33, I wanted to share some photos of what you might expect to see during construction. I know many of you are residents on or near Grosse Ile, so you may have seen the activity at Stony and Sullivan Islands over the past few years. So the construction activity is similar here at Hennepin Marsh. The construction will take place via barge on the water with some machines like the ones pictured here, placing the rock and other materials. You will also see the riverkeeper frequenting the site, as well as our staff observing construction and gathering data. And as shown on slide 34, as the shoals are being built and after they're in place, you will see the habitat being used. With our design work wrapping up, we're here tonight to share all of these details of the project with you, and we are interested in hearing any questions that you might have. After tonight, we plan on finishing up our design work. Once that's complete, we submit a permit application for the construction work to Eagle and the Army Corps of Engineers. Funding is not yet secured for the construction phase, but we anticipate that construction will occur at a portion of the project, perhaps within 2021. So thank you again for joining us tonight. I will now open it up for questions. I will start by taking a look at the chat. As I mentioned earlier, if you're able, please put your questions in that chat function. You can also enter, I have a question, and I can call on you to ask your question. If you're only on the phone, then I will open it up for voice questions after the chat questions are answered. Before I get into the chat questions, I just want to point out that Rose did point out that there was a mistake in the NOAA It's not the association, it's administration is the last A of NOAA. And on those lines, I do want to thank NOAA for providing the funding for this work. And then I also wanted to just clarify one thing, that we are currently working on getting our permit applications together, but no permits have been issued for this work yet. So this step is the public engagement process, so presenting tonight, and then from here we'll be proceeding with the permitting process. And then I also just wanted to thank everybody again for joining tonight. Normally we would be in person at or near the Hennepin Marsh area, but with the COVID situation, this was what we thought would be the best solution to get the word out about the project. So hopefully this is working well for everyone tonight, and thank you for logging in or calling in. Okay, so looking at the chats. Thank you, Rose, for the clarification. It's not the association, it's an administration. I have another question. How far south do the North Marsh Shoals run? Slide is unreadable due to size. It's about 12 lots south from the north end there. So I don't unfortunately have the address right here in front of me, but that's certainly something that we could, post or let you know. But I counted on our drawings about 12 lots south. So hopefully that gives you some. Are there any plans for Mama Judah Shoal? That's not included in this project at this time. Thank you, Rose. Nice job on the presentation. Thank you for this meeting and great work. Michigan DNR Fisheries Division would gladly assist in any way we can. Feel free to contact me. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate, of course, all of the different groups and organizations that provide their support for sure. Bill says, I live on the area, and how will I get my boat out? So we are, as I mentioned, this project is habitat focused, but we definitely want to accommodate, or will be accommodating, the recreational benefits. So the shoals are designed in such a way that we have openings between them that will allow for ingress and egress of boating. So that is the, hopefully that answers the question. So there is a question about how deep will the water be after the dredging? So right now we are proposing, these are the rock shoals that are going in. So there isn't any dredging associated with this at this time. So the water depths will be what they are currently. Question, what is the anticipated completion date for the project? The current funding is available for the design only. So right now we're completing our design within the next collection of months. And then from there, funding has yet to be secured. It's in process, hopefully. So hopefully you will see some action out on the water within the next year and a half. But right now we don't have, the funding is not complete for the construction portion. So this goes back to the question about where does the North Hennepin Shoals end? So when I mentioned the 12 lots, so we have the how can I explain this? Well, we have the point for the Hennepin that comes down and angles in towards, and then there's the area and the water is all owned by the Grosse Ile Nature Conservancy, but there are lots along the shore there, and so it's 12 lots kind of from that. There's a little waterway there. It's 12 lots from there. So it's hard for me to explain that, but hopefully you catch what I'm saying. So the question Bill has, so instead of us looking at water, we will now be looking at rock piles. So again, we have that the artist rendering that we showed in the presentation that you can refer back to. There will be some rock, as I mentioned, involved in this, and then the vegetation. So there will be vegetation on the shoals in addition to the rock, and then some will have just the rock. And it's going to be similar to the artist rendering that we show. So you will be bringing in rocks to make the shoal. Yes, that's correct. So if you're in and around the Grosse Ile area, you can take a look from Grosse Ile out at Stony Island and the work that we did out there, and that will give you an idea of what these things will look like. How high will the highest shoal be? So we have the renderings here. We have a good example of what things look like under the current conditions. So they are a few feet out of the water. And then there's a question about, is there a concern about sinkholes like on Point Hennepin? So I'm actually going to turn that over to Bob to answer that question.
Yeah, hi Dick, Bob Burns, how are you? To answer your question, I think you're referring to the sinkholes that occurred up on Hennepin Point 30, 40 years ago as a result of the pumping of the brine out from underneath and then placing the waste material on top created a sinkhole in Hennepin Point. Since that has settled, if you recall, most of the materials that were taken from the factories that line the shoreline there at the Wyandotte Chem facility were used to fill those sinkholes on the Hennepin Point area. And as far as I know at this point, that ground is pretty well settled and those holes have been filled. One addition to the question regarding how high the shoals will be and what impact that'll have on any of the property owners that may be in front of where the project is going to be constructed. Most of the homes in the area there are relatively higher up on the lots, and I believe the view you're going to have from your home will actually look out over top of the shoals, and you'll be able to see across the river with not much more obstruction than you currently have now.
Thank you, Bob. We have the question of, is this finalized? No, this is not finalized. As I mentioned, we're working through the end of our design here. We have yet to submit for permits. So this is not finalized. And today what we're interested in, hearing from the stakeholders and sharing all of you of the point that we're at. I have a question of how far offshore are the shoals located. I'm going to have to, I can check my plan real quick and get back to you on that. It's definitely a few hundred feet. Bob, do you have a?
Yeah, I can kind of jump in.
Yeah.
This is Peter Kantz, Bob Burns. How are you? Yes, the shoals are going to be out towards where the edge of the channel is, roughly about 100 feet from the channel, and that would put them probably anywhere, depending on where you happen to live or where you're viewing from along the shoreline of Grosse Ile, probably between 400 and 500 feet offshore, at least 300, but probably close to 4 and 5. So they're going to be relatively far off of shore. And again, to explain exactly how far south we're coming with the shoals on the North Hennepin Marsh project, Alice was referring to roughly about 12 lots south of where the canal is. It runs across to Hennepin Point. It runs through the island there. So about 12 lots down is roughly the very southern tip of this project site. So the majority of the project is actually going to be up in front of the Hennepin Point area as opposed to being down in front of the homes.
Thank you, Bob. We have another question regarding brine wells. Have you considered the brine well cavities vacated by BASF? And yes, we have. We have been made aware of those, and we actually did an extensive investigation to identify those in the field. So we've gone through quite a bit of process with that, identifying those to make sure that we are, this project is not impacting those in any way. I have a comment. Stony is not built directly in front of people's shore. It's built on the other side of the river. Yes, you are correct. There are people obviously along the roadway there, gross eel, but it is a slightly different situation. We have a question about, will you provide us with the studies, reports, analysis, or tests you have relied on to conclude this area will benefit from restoration? Bob, would you want to jump in and say how these things might be shared with folks?
Well, again, you and the folks at ECT were the ones who basically put together and gathered all of the technical data and things like that. I guess I would probably defer that to John.
John, you want to jump in?
Yeah, there's two things based on the question as it relates to how this benefits the habitat. This area is a known historical wetland area and has value when it comes to fish spawning and the such. So in the river, through the AOC process, this was one of the projects that was looked at and decided that would help benefit the AOC in restoring the loss of fish and wildlife habitat in the Detroit River. Again, as Bob pointed out earlier in his discussion, this project, along with the other ones collectively, are aimed at removing the beneficial use environments that are associated with the habitat issues in the AOC. So the data that is more of a historical, and we can, if you have a specific question about what type of data as it relates to the historical use of the area, we can get that and provide it.
Hey, John, one more thing to add there. I think that they were asking about how we could share data that might substantiate the fact that this kind of work benefits the wildlife habitat. And the thought there is that we're just now collecting post-monitoring data. We're doing post-monitoring for the post-construction monitoring for the Celeron project, and those reports of what we find will be published on our website. So far what we've seen is some pretty good things happening with improvements to fish and wildlife habitat, and as we develop or collect this data, it will be documented and made available for people to see on our website.
Thank you both. I think that kind of answers also the next question. Will you provide us with evidence showing that the other restoration projects have been successful? What alternatives to the rock walls have you considered? So we went through a process of determining, what materials to use and how to use them, and what would be the most benefit to the area. And what we've determined is that the rock really does provide a lot of habitat just in itself. We've seen a lot of fish species using the rocks, and we've heard from a lot of fishermen and anglers that that has really benefited the area and for spawning and other reasons for the fish. So that is the alternative that we landed upon, and using the vegetation really adds to the benefit. And it's, of course, an economical solution. as well. So we have a question, isn't most of the, go ahead.
One other thing, when it comes to these type of systems in the Detroit River, obviously one of the big things is they've got to be able to stand up to the flow and movement within the Detroit River system. So there is a structural element to them that is needed. Obviously, in a perfect world, we'd love to build these out of just soil and the such, so that they're native islands, but totally natural islands. As you can tell, particularly down in the South Hennepin Marsh, the natural islands that have been there are basically gone right now. Therefore, when these are built, you need to build them with a structural element that could withstand the elements, but then from that you turn around and start adding the other features to them. As Alice pointed out, some of these have the vegetation associated with them, so that basically the plants start growing on them, and over time, even the ones that are strictly rock will get vegetated just because of seeds being either wind blown or through bird transmission. And then the other piece being, the ones that are more for the tern habitat, which are a specific type of gravel that's placed on top. So there's a variety of them, but the long and short of it is you need to have a structural base to these, otherwise the system will disappear.
Thank you, John. We have a question, isn't most of the shoreline filled with Phragmites down there? So yes, there's a lot of Phragmites in the area. I think the benefit of this project is to adding some diversity in this area. It will be maintained for a period of, after it's planted for a year or two. So we'll be able to really help some new native materials establish in the planted areas. Yeah, so the next question is, you have stated that community involvement is important. Can you please share with us which homeowners you talked to before working in earnest on this project? So we have talked with the homeowners who the property owners of where the shoals will be located up to this point. But again, this is the point at which we feel like we've prepared the design enough to present to you all. So we haven't permitted the project yet. So this is a step to present this to you and to hear any questions and feedback. How do we know that the water on the east side of the shoal will not fill in with weeds and swamp? So we've designed these in a way that we have the backwater habitat available and some wetland right behind the shoals, but we do want to encourage some flow between them. So that's why we've configured them in the way that we have, where we have openings sufficient for flow in and flow out. So we've taken that into consideration in our design. Can each homeowner be provided with a 3D rendering of what the project will look like from their point of view, i.e. their deck or dock? We have the artist renderings that I've presented here, and I believe that we can have those provided. I guess we can talk with the team and see if we can develop a few more of those. Have you considered the potential impact to the existing shoreline, weed growth, concentration, trash on shoreline? So like I said, we've designed these in a way to promote, the beneficial habitat, but allow enough flow in there. And we've done some hydraulic modeling and other things to see how the flows are impacted. And actually, we're not impacting the flow in any way. So there's this project will not promote any additional stagnant or concentration of trash and things like that. Where will the construction materials and fill come from? So not too far away, there are several quarries that supply rock that are local to the area. So in the projects that we've completed, our contractor has been able to secure the materials fairly close by. Next question is, you didn't answer my question. I'm sorry, or I am asking for data that demonstrates this area right now. I'm sorry if we didn't answer the question. I believe we can supply the data and the information. It sounds like Sam jumped in and offered that. So if there's anything in specific, yeah, go ahead.
Let me jump in here. This is Rose Ellison from EPA. I think the question is demonstrates that this area is right. I think is maybe the question. And I just want to, this is based on research that started from USGS about 20 years ago. And it is just one area in the whole Detroit River system. This is just one project that is meant to, in the bigger picture, identify areas that have the right substrate and physical properties to attract the habitat that we think can be there. And these projects are meant to improve those areas to get greater habitat value out of. So there's it's not this project is not just any place in the Detroit River. It's one of a few that have been identified previously by the U.S. Geologic Survey, and then a bunch of other studies since then. A lot of those studies are, some of them are published. A lot of the data is like some unfortunately files that I can't even get to. There are certain programs, but this area, this is one of these areas where three-dimensional dynamic modeling and shows that we have the right conditions here. So if anybody's familiar with the spawning reefs, it's the same effort, it's the same approach. So these areas are the nursery areas, particularly focusing on fish, that go with the spawning areas to connect these habitat areas throughout the Detroit River. So if the question is, why this area? Like I said, we have data going back at least 20 years, identifying these key areas, and then that data, it's not just 20-year-old data, it's data that was places that were identified 20 years ago and then were further developed and to a few key areas, and this was one of them. So now, like I said, we can I think we can pull all those reports, but it's 20 years of the data in research and then consensus on this. I don't know if that helps, but so it's not like we just pluck this out of nowhere because Hennepin Point would be nice or Hennepin Marsh would be nice. It's a key area that ties into the reefs and all the other habitat projects that have been are being constructed. That map that Bob showed earlier on, those are all very strategically identified areas.
Thank you, Rose. That was very helpful. Hopefully that answers the question. The next question is, have you considered into this project the effects of the McLouth Steel property project? We are aware of the project at McLouth Steel. It's out of the zone of this project, so we aren't considering anything differently, but we are aware of that and understand what's happening. Will ice move the rock? So we have done some hydraulic analysis and evaluation, and the rock will be sized so that it won't be moved by the rock. These islands, so another question is, these islands you are talking about on the south end are just off the shore, not 400 feet from the shore. So I believe that what you're referring to are some islands that are close to the shore, but our shoals are going to be on the ones that are out further away. I don't know if Bob, you want to jump in and explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're talking about the North Hennepin project or the South Hennepin project. If we're referring to the South,
South, yes.
Yeah, well, the South, yeah, the work we're doing is offshore. I was referring to when I mentioned 300 to 400 feet or so. That was the North Hennepin shoal area. The South Hennepin, we will, as John mentioned earlier, our shoals will be basically rebuilding the existing islands that are out off of the shoreline. I would imagine those islands are probably maybe 200 to 300 feet or more, somewhere in that vicinity. I don't know, Alice, you could check the dimensions on it. But we are actually just rebuilding those islands. And if you're familiar with those islands, as John said, they are completely underwater. The only thing sticking out or left is the trees and shrubs, and they're all dying off. So with the high water we've had in the past and currently having now, and probably going to have for some time in the future, all those trees are going to be uprooted, and that whole shoal system is going to be gone, and that's going to open up that wetland area and to the river and the effects from the current and erosion further deteriorating that area.
Right.
Thanks, Bob. I think that is a good segue into the next question. Aren't the loss of the islands due to rising water levels? So with the effects of erosion, the traffic through the area and the higher water levels, the vegetation on those shoals are dying off, like you said, and deteriorating. So yes, that's a good point. They are deteriorating, and we are planning on building on top of them, like we mentioned. The next question is there a vote for this, or is this happening? As I mentioned, right now we're just going through this design phase process and moving towards a permitting. Again, the funding for the implementation or construction is not yet in place. So we are still, gathering the feedback and offering this information to the folks right now. So any questions or concerns as we move forward, we can discuss. The next one says no.
Hello, this
Go
is
ahead.
Sam.
Yeah.
I just, while we're chatting here, checked in on Google Earth and did a measurement looking at the South Marsh, and the islands are, well, they vary, but one of the northerly island is 780 feet from the shoreline. So yeah, it's a considerable distance. And that would be the similar in the North Marsh, we would be, a similar distance away for the construction as well.
Thanks, Sam. I think the next series of questions is just maybe a concern that nobody has spoken to me. So again, this is the time that we're presenting this to folks and opening it up for the questions and feedback. So if we need to, we can offer some contact information for additional questions if needed. Yeah, so these are kind of along the same lines. So again, this is the time that we're opening it up to all of you to see what we've been up to and help work together moving forward. We have a question about what.
One of the folks out there that are asking about being talked to and such. Just so everybody is aware, we've been worked with the property owners currently in order to come up with a plan. Obviously, there's a difference of the property out in the water versus where they may be on land a little bit, depending on if it's the north area or the south area. But the intent of it was to be able to do enough so that, as Alice pointed out, in this instance, to be able to come to you with, you know, at least a plan and an idea of what we would like to do in order to enhance the habitat down there. Before, if we would have just come in, you know, without having any idea of what was going on, obviously you all wouldn't have anything to be able to base any of your thoughts on. So that's why at this point you're seeing it in its more kind of you know, more detailed design concept than if we just had come and said, hey, we're thinking of building stuff out here. What are your thoughts? And so we wanted to make sure we had enough information to be able to share that you could make informed decisions on.
Thank you, John. The next question is in regards to what fish species are you trying to attract? We've cataloged many fish in this area, identifying at least 17 unique species prevalent in the area. So yes, we are, you know, part of this project is to support that fisheries and add to the diversity. Unfortunately, I don't have a list of fish here in front of me. I don't know if, Bob, do you have any anecdotes you'd like to add regarding fish species?
Well, again, you know, you guys went out and did the survey and have pre-construction and have determined we have quite a few. I don't know specifically, like I say, the targeted species, again, there's certain species that are targeted for sport fishing, what have you, but generally the habitats and things we're trying to do will benefit most species of fish, but primarily we have spawning areas that would be beneficial to sturgeon, to walleye, some warmer weather or shallow nesting fish such as your panfish and your bass. There'll be some structures along the shoals there that will help provide habitat and nesting for them as well. So again, creating the structures and the ability for fish to conjugate and hide in amongst these rocks and things, I think will benefit most species of fish that can be found in the river.
Thanks, Bob. Next question is in regards to concern about trash accumulating on these rock walls. You know, we haven't observed too much of that on the other projects, and you know, we're looking at the flows and modeling around the shoals, and you know, there isn't a plan for moving forward as far as collecting the trash, but we haven't seen too much, you know, accumulation on the other projects. I have another question about speaking. No one has spoke to me, and I definitely will be impacted. So I think we covered that question and why we're here today. I believe a rock wall of this type and size you've described as a nuisance and unreasonable, interferes with navigability of the water. Homeowners on this stretch own sailboats, paddle boats, kayaks, and other boats that will continually or currently have direct access to the water. Are you willing to reduce the size or length or type of shoals? So I think I'm gonna at this point kind of scroll back to some overview to kind of remind you of the layout that we have in the north here. Bear with me here for a second. So this is the bird's eye view that I spoke of on the slide here in slide 24. So we have openings here that allow for current flow as well as for boat traffic. And this is on the north Hennepin Marsh area. So we have these breaks in the shoals along here. And then the south. Whoops, sorry about that. This is an easier way. on the south end here. So again, we're building on the shoals at the south end here. So we have the existing little rock islands that we're building on. They're just a tad longer here. And then on the bottom shoal to the south, again, we're building on that there. And so we have a lot of space in between these shoals. Of course, that will be open for navigability.
Hey, Alice, go back to the north one. So the one thing Alice is only showing in this aerial is more or less a zoom in of the north end. As you all are aware, from the aerial shown on the left, you can see that little channel coming out off the shoreline, to give you, for those of you that live in the area, a point of reference. So that is roughly in the area of where this ends. Come on down, Alice. Keep coming, keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. No, up a little. Go back up, up in that area. So in addition to the openings within the shoals, there is absolutely nothing being constructed south of that point. Therefore, that whole area is open. You can see that whole area is open to, without obstruction to the river itself. And I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of had an idea of where things were, because obviously some of the concerns are being able to, you all live on the island, you're there for a reason. You like, the water, you like being able to get your boats out and the such. And we want to make sure you understand that this isn't to restrict your access to the water. For those that have shoreline access, you'll still have your shoreline access. You'll have your access out in and out, ingress and egress in and out to the main river channel as well. So it does kind of get a little confusing when you look at zoomed in areas, but if you're able to take a look at the overall, it kind of gives you a better idea. And then Alice, go down to the one rendering that is from the shoreline. That one. So this is, again, kind of for some that were asking, what's it going to look like? And can we get a rendering from each of our homes? This is pretty much standing on your guys' shoreline, because this photo, I believe, the actual shot taken from the Grosse Ile Land Conservancy property, which most of you know that is within that upper North Hennepin area. And you can see the size and the distance kind of from shore as it relates to looking across the river itself. Again, to give you a little bit of depth of concept as to how far out these are. Again, as Bob explained, from the main channel itself, if you were in the main channel of the Trenton Channel and you were coming towards shore, you're going to be probably about 75 feet from the main channel to 100 feet, and then is where these shoals will be, and there the rest of it is as it is now. So I just wanted to kind of get back to that using the visuals, because there's only so many seconds that slide was up during the presentation, and hopefully this helps you better understand a little bit more of the imagery and where these things are. Thanks, Alice.
Yep, thank you. Next comment. Yes, you have built these shoals before, but I don't think any are this close to residential property. That's probably a true fact. Next comment. I am also worried that you will cause more harm to the habitat than help it. We've lived here 20 years and seen tremendous improvement. in this area over time. I question whether this area needs the project. So thank you for that comment. That's good that you have seen a lot of improvement in the area. There is a lot of background that Rose went into when she chimed in, so thank you to Rose for that, as well as part of Bob's presentation about identifying, these areas as areas that, can really be enhanced even further. So even though there's been improvement, there's been a lot of study done to identify these areas to really improve that. And we have seen a lot of improvement in species out in the other projects that we've done in the area, and believe that this will just only enhance the area further. We have a comment that's just 20 feet. I'm not sure what that's pertaining to. How are you factoring water levels? We are currently in a high water level. 5 to 10 years, the water level may fall by several feet. How will these rock walls look then? So we are, have looked at the data of the lake levels, the river levels over a number of years, and they're constructed to accommodate the different fluctuations of water levels. You will see more rock if the water goes down. So I think that's what you're referring to.
The other thing associated with these is, as I was pointing out, as the cycle heads down, a lot of indications are we're going to be in waves of, as traditional up and down, but our downs theoretically based on, the current climatic modeling that's been going on will indicate that our downs are not going to be as far down as they were before. Obviously, that remains to be seen, and we'll see what happens in the future. But yes, because right now we can't plant the plants in the stone in the water because they'll drown out. But as the water levels drop down, these the rock sides, as I said, you go look at some of the old revetments around Stony Island and the such that have been there, you'll see a lot of trees, a lot of things have grown on them over the years because seed transition to them. And obviously when the water drops, you'll get seeds and the such, so you'll get plants growing. Will it be a completely green image? The answer is no. It won't be. You'll see. You will see some rock, out there. But again, using the image that's up now with the view from shore, yes, you'll see some rock. It'll be again quite a ways offshore, so that hopefully, and as Bob said earlier, most of the homes in the area sit up a little bit, so that you're hopefully looking over that if you're on that very north end.
Thanks, John. Next question is, will there be a vote? We're not planning on a vote at this time, but again, we're offering this information to all of you to gain your feedback and questions prior to going out for our permits. The part of the permitting process is a public comment period as well, so that's another way to gain comments throughout the process. Where do you anticipate getting the funding from? So it's the NOAA national that I mentioned earlier through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So NOAA provides the funding. They provided the design funding for this project, and it's anticipated that they would supply the funding for the construction as well. So, and they were also the funder of the Stony and Celeron projects that we completed. So the next question, you said you had spoken to people and who. I think we commented on this already. We have engaged the property owner of the property itself the shoals are being constructed on. I sent an email and asked to be contacted. No one contacted me, so I apologize for that. That's not our intent. So thank you for participating today. What rights will the property owner of the shoal have to release to FDR? John, do you have anything to comment on that?
Read that.
What
Looking at
rights
it
will the
again.
property, I think it's in relation to property owners that have the shoal on their property. The question is, what rights will the property owner of the shoal have to release to FDR?
The property owner that the shoals are being constructed on has all the rights of release, meaning it is up to them whether or not they have to sign off on the shoals being built on their property. So if they accept that, when it comes to, if the question's in regards to liability during the work and the such, that would be covered in the contracts with the construction companies and the such, that they would have all the liability for any thing that would occur out during the construction.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I totally answered that, but that's kind of what I'm gathering from the question, unless the questioner wants to rephrase it.
Yep. Next comment, thank you for the presentation. Hope there will be a boat tour of the area. Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely we've celebrated the completion of the other projects, and we've seen some great effects of it, so that's a reason to celebrate. Will you respond in writing to questions submitted by homeowners? Can you provide a contact and address to where such questions can be directed? John, do you have comment on where we can do that too?
We will, all those that registered, we will send an email out with contact information to be able to submit any of your questions to. Again, they'll be taken under consideration, and we'll work to adjust things to the best of the ability. And the other time, as Alice indicated, if this goes to permitting, or when it does, you'll be able to submit additional comments to the state at that time as well. So we'll take them now in hopes that we can make adjustments to the plan that may indicate. And then the other time will be during the permitting process. But we'll send an email out. So if you did not provide your email address, I'm trying to figure out, I guess if you didn't, just type in your email address in the chat. I think most everybody on this attendee list did, but if you did not, just type in your email address in the chat and we can make sure we get you contact information. I've noticed a couple of questions as it relates to spending money on this versus other things. That is not what we're here to decide any of these in the project. This project is part of the AOC program. Therefore, the money comes from the AOC program, or from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative program, that directs funds to improvements in the area. Anything else, whether it's infrastructure needs, whether it's things associated with the old McLeod property, whether it's things associated with the ASF property or any other issues in that region. That is not what the funding associated with these types of projects are, go towards. So from that perspective, the money that we have or will be able to have would go towards habitat work and not other activities in the area. There may be plenty of other needs. However, that's not what this funding source is eligible to do.
Yeah, John, this is Bob, and in addition to that, if the money is not spent on projects in the Detroit area, in our area of concern, there's multiple other AOCs around the Great Lakes that the money would go to. So, as you mentioned, there's specific pot of money is to be spent on these type of improvements in the Great Lakes, and if we don't apply for it or we don't do the projects in our area, then this money will go somewhere else and do projects at other parts of the Great Lake area.
Yeah, this is Rose again. I just want to reiterate that there are a lot of other programs for other issues that we find in the Detroit River, but this is a pot of money for Great Lakes Restoration initiatives, and specifically for areas of concern like the Detroit River. So if the money isn't going to be spent here in the Detroit River, as Bob said, it will be spent somewhere else in the Great Lakes, because that is what that pot of money is for. So it's not like, you know, we're taking money away from looking at pollution issues in the Detroit River to put toward habitat. It's not a zero-sum game like that. This is a pot of money, and if we don't use it here, then it will go somewhere else.
And Rose, there was another question regarding on that same vein about, well, why don't you use the money to address maybe some of the other issues like contaminated sediment, or there was a mention of an issue of the chalky discharges that come out in some of the areas along Hennepin, but there's other areas of the river up at Fighting Island, places like that. Can you just elaborate on that, Rose, about those other pots of monies and that other things are going on in parallel to what we're doing?
Yeah, right. So along with the money from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is in this case habitat, we also have under that money for contaminated sediments. So we are working with the folks at McCloskey. We're working on a project, a dredging project in the Upper Trenton Channel. We're actually going to be starting some sampling for right outside of McGuagan Creek under the sediment part of the restoration initiative. But then we also have our normal enforcement programs like the Clean Water Act and discharges like those. So those are all just separate, different programs. So it's like I said, it's not taking money out of one program to put to another. Those are all going on simultaneously. There's a lot going on. This is just one piece of a larger puzzle. But anyway, when it comes to the funds, this has been a targeted site, and we have expectations that the project will get funded, and like I said, if not, the money will get spent on other water bodies in the Great Lakes. So the two issues, don't get confused playing one problem in the Detroit River off of another. We're trying to deal with them all, and we're not shorting one in favor of another, if that makes any sense.
Hey, Rose, this is Sam, and just one more thing to add to this that we really haven't talked about much tonight, but certainly this is a great benefit for habitat, and it's these dollars that we've been spending, the track record has shown that. But in addition to the habitat benefits, the spinoff is to the economy, and our Great Lakes economy of $7 billion annually has greatly benefited. I don't have the exact statistics, but it's something like every Great Lakes Restoration Initiative dollar that's invested, we get $4 in return in the increase of our local economies. So we're truly, I mean, not just for the habitat benefit, but we're truly lucky that this funding is available right now for habitat, which is greatly increasing our local economy as well.
Thank you all for that. Moving on, next comment, this fishing has been fabulous. Is this really a problem? So just walking, I think we've covered this, but again, that's fabulous that have a good fishery near you. But this has been targeted through many studies as a rich area that can be richer, that we're building upon to help improve the area, that whole area of concern. So this has been targeted as a spot and a project that would greatly benefit the area. So the next question is, who will own the structure and be responsible for it once it is built? John, do you want to speak to this one? He might not be available, so let me just come back to that. Instead of fixing what you deem a problem, why not focus on things like the white brine discharge? Okay, we've already talked about that one. Thank you. I think we've addressed this one. That's in regards to, he says, to be honest, it's hard for me to support spending money on this when there are so many infrastructure needs just here on the island. So I think we were just speaking about that, how the pot of money is directed specifically towards the AOC and these improving the habitat of the area. So it's a funding that's not taking away from other areas or needs. So there's been a few questions about the ownership of the shoals. John, are you available to answer that? How do the ownership of the shoals work once they're built, or responsibility?
Yes. Again, as we talked before, on the north end, there's a little bit of difference between the North Hennepin area and the South Hennepin area. In the South Hennepin area, property, those that own property on land also own the property as it goes out into the water. On the north end, it's a little different in that the property ownership piece basically ends at the water's edge. The area out in the water itself was all part of BASF's property. That was deeded over to the Grosse Ile Land Conservancy. So the Grosse Ile Land Conservancy owns the area out in the water, and the land ownership again ends pretty much at the shoreline. Obviously, shoreline varies, but there is a defined location as to where that actually is. I saw a couple of questions on timeline as it relates to sugar and construction of the others. Just for informational purposes, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but currently it's NOAA's intent to put funding towards the construction of Sugar Island to begin next year. And Sugar will kind of go a little bit ahead of Hennepin, and as the funds are allocated towards the Hennepin project, Hennepin would come online. And then I think, as Bob and Sam pointed out early on in the project or in discussion, Sugar Island and the Hennepin Marsh area are the two remaining projects on the Detroit River Area of Concern habitat restoration list that need to be done in order to remove the impacts associated with fish and wildlife habitat, and therefore help towards the delisting of the Detroit River as an area of concern.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct on that, John. We're hoping to get both of these projects going next year.
There's a question about the dredging of sediment from other projects. No, from other project locations, no. The intent of this is not to bring in sediment from any place else in the river. All material on the north end will be constructed with material brought in, clean material, whether that's from the quarry for some of the stone, the topsoil, and native plant materials, and the logs themselves will be from nearby sources as well, but no, sediment won't be. On the south end, there may be, because there is some existing, the remnants of the existing shoals there. If some of the material in the marsh behind it is capable of structurally of supporting some plant growth, some of those may be topped with that, but it'll be strictly from right there in the area of where the shoals are going to be constructed. Right now, it's probably not feasible. Most of the material isn't structural, cannot form. It's kind of just flows wherever you want to place it. But that would be the only place that there is a slight potential of using some dredge material, but it would, again, strictly be on the south one and strictly from the area adjacent to the existing shoals. There's some questions on waterfowl. As mentioned, there one of the shoals on the north end will have tern habitat into it for the basically for the common tern, which is a threatened and endangered species in this region. We've still seen usage of on the other ones, and there's no reason to doubt that it wouldn't in this area. We've seen snowy owls in the wintertime using the other shoals. We've seen other types of terns being used. Obviously, cranes use them. So there is a lot of aviation. It's not the right word, and obviously you can tell I'm not a bird person, but from that perspective, I think there was a couple of pictures that Alice had showed in the presentation of some of the birds' usage of some of the other shoals. There's a question about some presentation on Sugar Island. That we don't know as it relates to that, Sam and Bob. I think you've had a couple of discussions on sugar with the public. If I'm right or wrong, if you want to chime in on that.
Well, for I guess I'm not understanding the question entirely, but we've had great.
Is there a presentation on Sugar Island improvements?
We did hold a public meeting. It was not in those days when we held that meeting. It was not virtual. There was no COVID, so we all gathered, I think, at the Detroit Yacht Club. Great turnout and great reception to that project. The only negative comment about the sugar project was that we're not starting it quick enough. So everybody really wants to see that one happen, as far as I know. One other quick mentioning here with the waterfowl. Yeah, as all these projects, we're really targeting the migratory birds with the idea of planting native fruiting shrubbery on the islands that will offer a little stop for a snack for these birds that come by. In addition to that, the native perennials with the milkweeds and some of the specific wildflowers that will be planted, will be doing what we can to attract monarch and others other pollinators, which are so important to our area, that are kind of decreasing in numbers. So it's a multi-pronged approach to habitat improvements. Fish, birds, reptiles, and amphibians, they all will benefit from this project.
Just so everybody is aware, this presentation and the Q&A has been recorded, and we'll be able to get it to the Friends of Detroit River for posting on their website here shortly. And by shortly, it won't be here by the end of the week, but look for it sometime within the next week. The last couple of questions, and then we need to wrap up since it's 8 o'clock, are discuss participation as residents and the ability for the project to move forward. Again, the property owners, whether that's in the north or south of the project, have to authorize the project in order for it to be able to be submitted for permitting. So that is step one. And your participation today, and also, as we said, since all of you registered and provided your email addresses, and if you didn't, I saw a couple pop up, we will get contact information out that you can submit your other thoughts to, and that we'll be able to take those under advisement and see where we may or may not be able to make adjustments based on the comments. I would ask, if you do send in comments, that you please not only include your name so that we can contact you if we have follow-up questions on it, but a contact information and the best time to call that possibly, just so that we're not bugging you at a inconvenient time. Or if you only want to be contacted by email, that's fine as well. And then I would also ask that you kind of indicate where you're located, or if you want to give your address, that helps us understand whether it's the north end or south end, and if your questions pertaining to a view and you're up at the more northern end of the north end versus the southern part, we'll kind of have a better feel for how to answer and take your input in on the project. Sam, Bob?
I think we're getting close to wrapping up here, John. You want to?
Yeah, I can chime back in. I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. Thank you so much for contributing all the questions and comments in the chat box. And like John said, we'll send out some contact information. So, if you think of any more questions and comments you want to share with us or further the discussion, you're welcome to do that. I just throw it back to the team again. Is there anything anybody wants to add this last minute? Hearing none, I think we'll close it down. Again, thank you so much. I hope this virtual platform worked well for you tonight. And we hope you all stay safe, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.